As always, today's video does contain subject matter that some people may find disturbing, and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. I would love to read it. And of course, thank you. This actually happened to me in 2019. And with the pandemic right around the corner, it gave me a good reason to stay inside afterwards. I always enjoyed the holidays, especially when my family had big gatherings with my siblings, grandparents, and the sort. We all exchanged gifts, and it had become a bit of a tradition. I got meaningful gifts or something that everyone would like, but my older brother and I would always try to get each other the most absurd things that we could think of. One year, he couldn't think of anything to get me, so he got me a spatula and gave me his old toaster, because I told him that it would match my kitchen's theme. So, that year, I actually had Black Friday off, and I thought I would try to get some good deals and gifts. I usually wasn't one for that kind of thing, but thought that it couldn't hurt to see what was out there. Now, I had no intention of getting up super early to wait in line in the cold, but I did go to a few places starting around midday. I didn't have a whole lot of luck at the first few stores, but I did get a good deal on my lunch that day. I decided to try one more place, which it was at a popular department store nearby. I shopped there often enough to know that I would at least find something. So, I grabbed one of those half carts and started checking out all the sale displays. I got through a couple of aisles and was surprised at the amount of people that were still there shopping frantically. It was probably around 5 or 6 p.m. at this point, so I figured it would have died down for the most part. This caused me to look around every time before I pulled anything off a shelf to make sure that nobody was nearby to tackle me or try to fight me over an item. I wasn't into all that. There is no deal ever worth an assault charge. So, honestly, I would have just handed it over. While I was in the houseware section, I saw a nice coaster set that I knew my mother would like, and as I reached for them, I saw a guy reaching on the shelf for something right below me. It startled me at first because I had just looked around and didn't see this guy, yet he managed to silently approach me from the side. He chuckled and apologized for scaring me, and I laughed back saying that it was fine. I noticed that he had grabbed some similar coasters, and he attempted small talk, joking about a gift for someone he hardly knew. After just a few minutes, I walked off, continuing on in my own little world. After the houseware section was the pet section. I had a small puppy with short fur at the time, so I had her wearing sweaters to stay warm in our northern winters. She was actually the puppy to my grandmother's dog, so I thought that it would be cute to get them matching sweaters. So that's where I ended up. While I was looking at the options, I heard someone say, "You got a dog too?" I looked over to see the same guy now standing at the front of the aisle that I was in. I said that I did, and explained what kind of dog she was, and he told me about his. Again, a small conversation took place, and I walked away. As I walked to a few more departments, I coincidentally ran into this guy each time. I know it's entirely possible that it was just a coincidence at first, but if you saw the same person, would you try to start up a conversation with them each time? Because he certainly did. And it was just awkward having to walk away each time. I didn't want to be mean, but I didn't know what to do or say after, the third time. So, instead of feeding into the conversation, I would just smile give a light chuckle and keep on moving. I ended up skipping around a bit and actually went into the intimates section thinking that surely he wouldn't just coincidentally end up there too. Unfortunately, he did. However, two things were different at this point. He no longer had his basket with his items in it, and he didn't approach me. I circled the same area and went back to the same rack that I had been looking at, and he did the same thing. That's when I really started feeling paranoid and followed. At that point, it was time to leave, so I picked up my phone, pretending like someone had called me, and I made the comment that I would be there soon, acting like somebody was expecting me. But in hopes to scare this guy off, maybe, I said out loud what store I was at, and that I felt like I was being followed. While still acting like I was on the phone, I left that area and made my way to the checkout, weaving through different aisles in an attempt to lose him. To my disappointment, I looked around and saw that same guy looking at the different lanes. I tried bending over into the cart, nearly looking like I was putting my head in my purse, I'm sure. I assumed the guy saw me because he ended up in the lane next to me, holding just a soda and staring at me. I was panicking at this point, and I wanted to get to my car fast and possibly call someone for real this time. While the cashier was ringing up the person in front of me, I pushed my cart to the side a bit, made it look like I was looking at the impulse stuff, and instead swiftly left the store without purchasing anything. As I was fast-walking, nearly running to my car, I again pulled my phone out and dialed 911, because if I saw him again, I was calling, no matter what. I looked back as I crossed into the parking lot and didn't see him, so I picked up my pace. I started digging out my keys from my purse when I suddenly heard shuffling, like someone was running towards me, and of course it was the same guy. As he got closer to me, I hit dial on my phone, yelled out, "Leave me alone," and turned back around. But the guy grabbed me by my arm. I started shouting some more, hoping that someone was nearby and would do or say something. While I'm trying to get him to let me go and flailing my other arm, he said that he's with AP, Asset Protection, for the store and demanded that I go with him. He was basically accusing me of stealing. I completely changed my mentality at this point and became angry. This guy was following me around the store because he thought I was a thief? I had shopped there on many occasions, never had problems, and never had a criminal record. On what grounds did he have to think I was going to steal some coasters, a dog sweater, and some popcorn? And how would I even have managed that? I kind of chewed him out about this, and mentioned how he was harassing me when he let go of my arm. He then made a comment along the lines of, "Well, then we can just go into my office, check your belongings to confirm that, or I can let it slide if you go get some drinks with me." This guy was standing in front of me with this annoyingly smug grin, and really thought that this was a valid option. I told him to hell with both of those choices, and said that I was going back into the store to talk to the manager. This seemed to piss him off as he grabbed my arm again, squeezing it harder, and demanding that I come with him before he called the cops. That was when I remembered that I had dialed them on my phone, so I started yelling things like, "Let go of me," and shouted where I was, hoping that they would get the hint and be there. The guy tried putting his hand over my mouth, pushing me against some random car, so I bit him. Finally, with us both screaming at this point, another lady noticed us and began walking up and asking if we were okay or needed help. I shouted that I didn't know this guy, which caused her to speed up, coming to my side. I was worried the guy may try to do something to her, but to my surprise, he instead took off. She approached me and was holding me and asking what happened, and I started explaining to her. I grabbed my phone and noticed that it was still with the operator, who told me police were on their way and should be there soon. The lady then walked with me back into the store, I waited inside for the cops, but I still asked for a manager to confirm what I'd already thought was the answer. That guy was not with their asset protection team. They explained that if they suspected someone, they weren't allowed to approach them the way that he did with me for sure, and stated that they would have already have called the police as well. When I explained what happened to the police, I was shocked to find out that this wasn't the first time they had heard about this happening this year. Apparently, there had been several reports of a guy stopping girls in parking lots, accusing them of stealing and then offering them alternatives. The description they had even matched the same guy. That angered me and worried me even more. I knew there wasn't much I could do, but I felt bad that I wasn't able to keep him around for them to catch him. They took my contact information and asked if I would do a lineup if they caught the guy, and I agreed. I still haven't received that call to this day. It honestly still terrifies me to this day because sometimes I dwell on it too much, thinking what would have happened if I actually went with him. Hell, what would have happened if I agreed to a date? And since he still hasn't been caught, is he even still in the area? I just hope that he never got further than confronting someone at their car, but to the creepy fake asset protection guy, now that I'm armed with pepper spray, maybe we should meet again. I used to work for a small electronics repair and sales shop that was directly connected to a small coffee shop. By directly connected, I mean that it was pretty much one business. There was just a wall with a cutout door frame separating us, and they were both owned by the same couple. And the idea was that we could potentially offer our repair services to the people that liked to sit at coffee shops, or sell them new devices like chargers, mice, and such. For the most part, I don't really think the businesses had a lot of crossover when it came to the clientele, with the exception, of course, of cables and chargers. We were located fairly close to a hotel, and we were a decent work spot for people that wanted to do work at a coffee shop that wasn't Starbucks. We had high-speed Wi-Fi, at least for the time, and back then there weren't many places that offered free Wi-Fi yet. As mentioned, one of the services that we offered was device repair. This included computers and cell phones, and we were pretty good about getting things fixed and back to the clients within a day or two at most. The time that I worked there, I fixed a number of systems. And while it was always mildly humorous to see things that were adult in nature on a system that was given to us by a little old lady, I never judged anyone based on what they did on their systems. A lot of people look at adult content, even those in their late 70s, so I would just chuckle to myself and continue on with the repair. However, there was a policy both within the company and personally that if we ever found illegal content on a system, we had to report it. I don't want to say what content specifically, but I'm sure that you can guess what I mean. Thankfully, that never really came up, and we never had to contact the police about anything we found. One day, whenever I was working, a guy came into the store and asked me if I knew how to fix computers that were locked. I wasn't really sure what he meant, so I asked him if he was just locked out of the system or if something else was going on. He then placed a laptop on the counter, opened it, and showed me what he meant. His system was actually locked out by a crypto locker. For those that don't know what a crypto locker malware is, it's basically a virus that locks you out of your system and files and tells you that in order to get to your files, you have to pay them X amount of Bitcoin, and then they'll give you the passkey to unlock it. They are pretty aggressive computer viruses, but depending on which one you got hit with, you can get around some of them if you know what you're doing, assuming that it hasn't completely encrypted your drives. I told him that it was a possibility, but that it was going to take more than a few hours, and quoted a 2 to 3 day repair time. We usually didn't quote days like that, but we also didn't usually get CryptoLocker cases. The guy seemed to think about it for a few moments, glancing at me and then back to the laptop, tapping his foot quickly while mulling it over. He then asked me how much it was going to cost, and I gave him the standard quote, but then mentioned that depending on how bad it was, it could be a bit more. He nodded, and then agreed to leave it with us. I wrote up the paperwork, he quickly signed the quote and page, and then thanked me for my help. I said of course, and told him that I would call him if we were able to get anywhere with the recovery. The day went on as normal, and after a few hours, I decided that I would take a look at this laptop while I had some downtime. I got it booted up and connected to what I needed to connect it to, and then started attempting the recovery. To my surprise, this was a very basic malware, and it hadn't really done any actual damage to his files. It was more of a permanent overlay that was just blocking the screen. It basically just looked like I could go ahead and copy his files over, just do a full clean Windows installation, and it would be good to go. When I got to this point, I went ahead and called the guy that left it at the store. The conversation went like this. Hello? Hey, this is my name from the store. You left your laptop here earlier today for repair. I wanted to let you know that I was able to get into the files, and we should be able to get this done today. Would you be able to come pick it up tomorrow? You got into my files? His voice changed a bit, sounding a bit more concerned. I was able to get to them, yeah. I have them copying over to an external drive right now, and then I'll just do a clean install of Windows, and you should be good to go. He then went silent for a few moments, like he was thinking of what to say to me, and then hit me with a, "What did you see?" I paused, a bit confused. You mean like with the virus? No, I mean in my files. What did you see in my files? This question was one that I was dreading. If he was asking me what I saw, then it was likely that he was hiding something illegal. I mentioned that I hadn't really seen anything, that I was just copying them over to a drive, but then mentioned that I would have to scan them to make sure we got rid of the malware. He then asked, "What is your policy if you find illegal content in my files?" It was at that point that any uncertainty was removed from my mind. I mentioned that it was policy to report the illegal content to the police. As soon as I said that, he hung up the phone without saying anything, leaving me just sitting there staring at this laptop as it was backing up. I wasn't really sure what to do, because I personally had not seen anything illegal yet, but the way that he acted told me that if I had clicked through his documents, I most likely would. Part of me was holding on to the slight bit of hope that maybe it was just some pirated music or a cracked version of The Sims or something, but deep down I knew that that wasn't the case. At this point, I decided to go ahead and just leave the computer backing up, and opted to deal with it in the morning as it was getting pretty late. Odds were that I was going to have to report this all to the police in the morning, and I really didn't want to deal with that right then and there. I know that may sound dumb, but the computer wasn't going anywhere. It was going to be locked down in the back, and I would leave a note on the system that said "Do not touch." Plus, the files were all going through the backup and scan, and it was going to take a couple of hours anyways. I locked up the store, did the closing tasks, and I went home for the night. I even made sure that this guy wasn't standing outside the store waiting for me to leave or something, but there wasn't anyone there. I assumed that that was going to be the end of it, until the morning at least. And it kind of was. But imagine my surprise when I showed up to open the store the next morning, and the store was nothing more than a blackened and burned out husk. When I got there, I saw the owner and asked him what the hell had happened. He then tells me that at some point in the early morning, someone had apparently come into the store, broken in through the cafe's back door, and burned it all. At that point, I knew what this was. The guy actually had broken in, and not only that, he went full nuclear on the store. I mentioned the situation to the owner, and he told me that he would need me to give a statement to the police. I agreed and said that I would. To wrap this up, the obvious. The guy burned the store down. There was camera footage of him breaking into the store, and while he did wear a mask, the police were able to at least get a vague idea of what he looked like. I told the police that he had left his computer in the store, and mentioned that, when I called him, he seemed really anxious about what we would do if we found illegal files. I think they saw where this was going, and they asked if I knew his name. I remembered that his first name was Brian, but I couldn't recall his last name beyond that it was an uncommon name. It was something similar to Stromboli or something like that. They took the information that I could give and said that they would look into it, but then mentioned that if I could remember anything, to please call them. After they left, my boss and I went into the building to see what, if anything, could be salvaged. We went over to the repair room and everything was completely destroyed. I saw what looked like a laptop, but it was completely melted and gone. I put it off to the side though, just in case they could get data from it somehow. I know data forensics analysts can do some pretty crazy things. Unfortunately, the dock with the drive that it was backing up into was completely destroyed as well. After rummaging around a bit more, it clicked in my head that he had signed the quote when he dropped off the system, and that I put all the quotes with the cash in the safe in the back at closing. The owner popped it open, and sure enough, everything was sitting there, none the worse for wear. We ended up calling the police back out and gave them the work order that he signed, as well as 2 very heavily damaged hard drives. At this point, the whole case was out of our hands. The police had the information and the drives, and if they could pull anything from them, they would. Unfortunately, I have no idea if this guy ever got caught or arrested. The owner didn't reopen the store after this either, so obviously I didn't work there after that. The building did get rebuilt and turned into a Jimmy John's, I think, which, great, but I do kind of miss working there and doing the repairs. Either way, that's my creepy story of when I worked at that tech store, and all I can do is hope that the police did get that guy, because God only knows what was on that hard drive. I used to work at a popular women's clothing store in Wisconsin. I found that I liked working the evening shifts too, because the night manager was super chill. There were also less customers, and I spent a lot of my time playing around on my phone. It was in a fairly populated area, along an outdoor sort of strip mall, alongside a few other businesses. The area was actually growing, as it had just been a grassy field a few years prior. They built a few commercial places, as well as some of those huge copy and paste houses. You know the type. But anyways, Because it was just growing, that meant that there wasn't a lot of activity around, which also meant there was little to no crime. This was also a reason that I liked working at night. Sometimes we had sidewalk sales and promotions to try to drum up business, and no one was really worried about theft. It was actually quite nice at the time. So, my story took place one of those nights. I was working late. I was actually going to be the closing manager, as I had just started doing that week prior. It hadn't been long. This time of the year, we were busier than normal, so we usually had 2 people on closing, and this night it was me and a girl named Nora. Nora was always a very perky and happy girl. I swear she didn't have a mean bone in her body. She was a sales associate, mainly, which meant that she typically walked the floor and helped the customers, and she was great at it too. I used to work alongside her, but I went to be a cashier and up from there. So she'd been folding and putting away clothing that was left out or thrown around. I was at the register counting down one of the tills since we were going to be closing soon. Nora was just about to take the claim items, which were items that were damaged or defective, to the back room, and I asked her to drop the bank bag in the back too. While she was in the back, there was a couple that came in. So again, it's probably close to 9, because that was when the store closed and it was dark. Most of the other stores are closed too, and the parking lot was pretty big with minimal lights in it, so I didn't even see them approach or walk by the window, until they opened the door. I greeted them, as I do, and the woman smiled at me and continued walking towards the first rack by the door. The guy, however, didn't even look at me and kept looking around at the walls, like he was specifically looking for something. The way they were both acting immediately put me on edge, though. The fact that he wouldn't make eye contact, and how she went straight for a rack and started messing with stuff, made me think something bad was going to happen. I guess the guy must have noticed too, because as I was trying to walk towards the farthest register, where I'd left my phone, the guy called me over, claiming that he'd had a question. I tried grabbing my phone first, but he jumped over the counter before I could do anything other than yelp, and he grabbed it from me. We had a small struggle before he pulled out a knife, making me give up. He then took out some zip ties, tied my hands behind me as his partner in crime walked over to us. She was watching this take place with her wide, bloodshot eyes and snickering. If I wasn't pinned to the wall with a knife to my face, I would have thought that she was pretty terrifying alone. I offered what I had in the register if they just left there, but the guy ignored me and told the girl to start grabbing. She pulled a trash bag out of her jacket, and as she started laughing, she grabbed everything she could and shoved it into the bag. All I could think was if I just sat there and let them finish, they would leave, and we would be safe. But then my mind kept going to the worst case scenarios. These people walked in without any masks on, and they didn't even try to cover their face. What were the odds they would actually let us go? Then, I remembered there was an us, and I feared that Nora would walk back in here and her life would be in danger. I tried to think of anything I could to keep them from going into the back, or to get me back there with her. Unfortunately, there was some kind of noise or something, because they both froze and looked towards the back room. I don't think they even considered that there could have been someone back there. The guy asked me if I was alone, and I said yes, but he called the girl over, directing her to watch me. I pleaded with him to not go back there, but he continued on, holding his knife to his side. The next thing I heard was a blood-curdling scream that had to have come from Nora, and a loud slam. That scream still haunts me. I was starting to go into a panic attack and was feeling sick to my stomach, terrified of what could have happened to her. When he came back out, I didn't see the knife on him, but he ordered her to continue grabbing. As she continued to feel the bag and seemingly talked to herself, the guy was patting me down. It was like he was trying to find more valuables, but the look on his face also told me that he was enjoying what he was doing. I felt disgusting. I couldn't protect my employee and friend. My store was being robbed shortly after I became the manager, and now this. The damage this event had on me affected me for years. After what felt like hours, the two of them started fighting, as she had only brought 2 bags, one of which had started ripping, and she wanted to get more. He told her that what they'd had was enough and started heading out for the door. For some reason, though, he came back over to me, cut the ties off, and then said that after counting to 100, I should call an ambulance. Then he ran out the door. I laid there motionless on the ground, counting out loudly in case they were listening. In between numbers, I yelled out to Nora saying that it was safe, hoping that I would get a response. I never did. After rushing through my numbers, I quickly got up and ran to the back as fast as my shaking legs would let me. My heart dropped when I found Nora laying on the floor with blood near her head. I softly rolled her over on her back, and thank God she was breathing. I didn't see a knife anywhere or any real wounds, so I didn't know where she was bleeding from at first, until I saw the spot on her head. There was a cordless phone in the back room, so I called 911 and explained what had happened. The rest of that night hardly existed in my mind. The cops and paramedics arrived. They took us to the hospital where we were treated and had to give our statements. I couldn't leave Nora's side. I felt like I was to blame and I didn't want her to be alone. Nora and the guy apparently had a bit of a struggle too, and he was choking her until she passed out. As he let go of her, she fell to the ground, hitting her head on the desk. She'd actually had a concussion, but was going to be okay. Her fiancé and mother showed up shortly after, so I left her in the room, and I went to go speak to the store owner that had come out to find out what had happened. I actually had to go back to the store to make a report and help determine what all was taken. I didn't get home until nearly midnight because the owner was insistent on doing it all that night. We had cameras in the store, and the detective even suggested that he lock up the store and that we could continue this the next day. But the owner didn't even bother to ask if we were okay. The store managers were awesome, but the owner? I despised him, and I'm sure you can see why. So, overall, those two ended up stealing around $2,000 worth of clothing and accessories, and nothing else. We found my phone on the floor as well as Nora's. They never took the money from the register, nor did they touch the bank bag that Nora took to the back that was still sitting on the desk. I still have no idea their reasoning because they did get caught when they found some of the items for sale on eBay. We'd been doing a special on these charm bracelets that were unique to our store, so they were pretty easy to trace. If they were wanting to make money, why not take the money? The only thing I can think of between that and the guy telling me to basically check on her, it makes me think that maybe he was remorseful and/or this was their first attempt. Either way, it was an event that I will never forget. I have healed and moved on from then, but I do still have some anxiety when going out alone, especially at night, so I try to avoid it. Nora was also okay, and thankfully neither one of us works there anymore. If anything, be safe this holiday season. Be aware of your surroundings, but also, don't be too hard on yourself. Life is too short to not enjoy it. I worked at an electronics store for 4 years when I was in my 20s, with no other experience than retail. For the most part, it was a decent starting job, except for the holidays. I despised being anywhere near that store from November to February, between the sales, the excessive returns being done, and how horrible people are to one another. I have a few memorable stories to share, and I just hope people take something good out of it and maybe make a change for the better. We were closed on Thanksgiving during the time that I worked there, but we opened around 4 in the morning for Black Friday. I never understood it, but we had people camping out front on Thursday night. We had a rewards and membership club too, so while we had weekly newsletters that people could grab on their way in, we also sent them via email to our members. Around this time, it also included the deals for Black Friday and the benefit of being first in line as long as you brought your membership card for proof. This caused some anger for some of the people that had been waiting outside. They always made us push the member thing, especially around that time, including the benefits of first access. The membership was free too. The most annoying thing about it was probably the amount of emails you got. So, I got there early Friday morning, saw the line of people waiting outside, and went in to begin a very long day. When we went to unlock the door, we started explaining the 2-line method. People were confused and angry about not getting to be in first, even though they had been there, as they put it, all night. We explained that this wasn't new because we had been doing this for years prior. We started checking everyone's member cards and letting them in. Some of them thought they would be sly and sign up for the membership on their phones. However, the membership had to be at least 72 hours old. And it shows when you sign up for the card, even the digital one or on the app. So we have some people swearing they will never come back to our store, some people stewing in their own anger on the side, and some still trying to get in, claiming they have a membership but our system must just be messed up. Another guy tried to take matters into his own hands by pulling out a pocket knife, walking up to my coworker, and stabbing him in the side. My coworker went to grab his side and kind of doubled over as he was in pain, of course. I noticed this and tried asking if he was okay, what had happened, and as soon as we both looked down, people ran past us and into the store, including the stabber. I had to block off my coworker just on the outside to prevent people from stomping on him. We called for help, and thankfully the wound wasn't too deep, so he just needed some stitches. He did describe the guy that stabbed him, and, shockingly, he was still in the store, arguing with another guy over a printer. He was arrested too. He stabbed my coworker, thankfully not hitting anything major, all so he could get a $73 printer. He left with multiple charges, and I'm sure the cost was way more than that. Another Black Friday, I started out on the floor to make sure the lines were in order, the shelves weren't too disorganized, and to hopefully answer questions and calm any potential disputes. We had a pretty big display on video games for a console that had just been released. We didn't have any more of the consoles, though, and thought it would be way too dangerous to try and sell only 4 or 5, because that would be all we could really get. So, instead, we just sold the games for buy one, get one half off. There were several people surrounding the display and aisle, grabbing one or more of each game, and several of them were on the phone asking the person on the other side which ones to get. Some were taking pictures of them, and others even tried to take multiples. They were one each per person, though, so we tried to stop them while in the aisles, but they were mostly stopped at the register. Apparently, they didn't believe the salespeople. So at this same display, I saw probably a middle-aged man shuffling through the games like he was casually looking, or maybe just looking for one particular game. He was moving out of the way for others, not taking any other games, just browsing. I did my normal asking if he was finding everything okay, and he smiled and said that he was just looking, but he thanked me. A few people seemed to be getting irritated but were walking away from the games, so I let it go, thinking that someone in that department would handle it. It wasn't long after this that I was called to the front to be a cashier, as they were forming quite a line and someone needed to go to break, and honestly, I would have preferred that anyways. So I rang people up, argued a lot, and called a manager a lot to explain the terms of the sales. After some time, I heard more yelling coming from one of the aisles, but I definitely couldn't do anything about it then, being stuck in the front. After ringing up a few more customers, I remember noticing that it seemed quieter than normal. I could clearly hear the repetitive Christmas music playing, but very little talking or laughing from the customers. It was something that I subconsciously noticed, but I was so busy that I didn't bother looking around for a reason. That is, until the reason was directly in front of me. I had just finished closing my till when I heard the familiar sound of someone laying an item on my counter. But the hand holding the item was covered in blood. I looked up, holding back from yelling some expletives, to see that same middle-aged man, with a slight smile on his face, saying, "I found the game I was looking for." That wasn't the scary part. It was the fact that his head, down to his shoulder, was drenched in blood. People were frozen in place looking at him, or us, taking pictures and talking on their phone. I asked the guy if he was okay and what had happened, and he seemed oblivious that he was covered in blood. He said that he was looking for the game, felt something hit his head, knocking him to the floor, but he had gotten right back up. He said he rubbed the back of his head and just wiped the little blood he saw on his pants. I immediately called for a manager and then called an ambulance, and we then followed the blood trail back from the checkout to an aisle with console accessories and the game display. The guy was adamant about feeling fine though, and he really wanted to make his purchase, but he wasn't like the other crazy shoppers. The whole time he was soft-spoken, patient, smiling, saying he really wanted the game for his grandson. We gave him some paper towels to hold on his head, and we completed the transaction for him. When the ambulance got there, they cleaned him up a bit and found a huge gash on the back of his head. It looked like he had been bashed in the head with something. His wife and daughter actually came in later that night, asking for a replay too. We explained what we had seen, and they also gave us a little more information. He apparently had been hit with something that had a single point, almost like the back end of a hammer, or maybe a meat tenderizer. It had broken open his scalp, but thankfully his skull and brain were fine. The guy even told them that he didn't feel any pain after he stood up. He was completely unaware of the blood pouring from his head. They also wanted to thank us for calling an ambulance and not letting him leave alone, and said that they did file a police report and that we would probably be contacted for the camera footage. We were, and our security team gave it to the police. I talked to one of the guys who watched it with the police, and they said that the guy had just pulled a game from the shelf, flipped it over to look at the back, when the guy on the other side of the display walked around and bashed this guy in the head. He then grabbed the game the guy was looking at, threw it back on the ground, walked over this guy, and continued looking at other games. He didn't even take the game the victim had, and the game wasn't limited. When I walked back there that night, there were several still on the shelf. I remembered the game from when I checked the guy out, and I checked to see if it was the last one or something. We were told to contact the police if this dude ever showed up again, but we didn't see him the rest of the night. I never checked him out, so I don't even know if he bought anything, or if he just left or even stole something. I never saw the guy again, but I'm unsure if they ever caught him. But still, this POS bludgeoned this guy for a $60 game that he didn't even take. He could have killed him for nothing. Not to mention the fact that other people walked by this man on the ground and did nothing. I finished that season out, but I quit the following year before Thanksgiving. I was unwilling to cater to people that showed that level of ungratefulness after a holiday about being thankful. Some people just suck. I do ask that if you go shopping at any point in time, try to look out for one another, because being compassionate and making a difference to others, retail workers included, is way more important than a potential deal on your kid's presents. Just try to take care of each other out there. So this was a collection of retail horror stories, retail and Black Friday horror stories technically. But let's be honest here. All these people would have had to have say was, I worked in retail for X number of months, years, days, whatever, and that would have been a horror story in and of itself. Especially if they worked at Blockbuster. Why do I hate on Blockbuster so much? I don't know. I just do. I guess I could hate on Quiznos or Pizza Hut since I worked for both of them. I don't know, though. Blockbuster just feels like the easy target since they don't really exist anymore. Minus the one that still exists, I guess. Is what it is. You know what? No, I'm going to double down. Screw Blockbuster. Anyways, they can't sue me, right? They don't have any lawyers anymore. Hopefully, you all enjoyed this collection of retail stories on this December 3rd. I may ask you real quick, how the hell did we already end up in December? Because I don't know. I understand how calendars work, but how is it already December? This hurts my brain. Yeah. Hopefully you all enjoyed these stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button if you want to hear more like this. If you're new and liked what you heard, consider subscribing to the channel. That'd be greatly appreciated. And if you've ever worked retail and would like to leave me a comment of your time at retail, please do so down below. If you want it to be a story, though, please go to my website and submit it to me, which is at the beginning of this video, astheravendreams.com. Yeah. Yeah. I really don't have much else to say here. I hope you're all having a beautiful weekend. It's hard to believe it's already the weekend, too. This week kind of flew by. And I hope you have something fun planned to do tonight or tomorrow, either way. If not, well, then enjoy the time to do nothing. If you're working, I'm sorry. And if you're working retail, I'm very sorry. I'll stop now. I hope you all have a beautiful day. I hope I do see you around on the next video. But of course, my friends, until it happens, remember you are loved, you are important, you are valid, you're the best you that you can be, never let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, friends, much love, and sleep well.